All right, Dignity Story Z crew, settle in because today's love story is going to leave you breathless. This one's got it all. Asterisk, the champagne flute shattered against the marble floor of the penthouse, sending crystal fragments across the room like fallen stars. Alina Vasquez didn't flinch as the sound echoed through the silence. She had grown accustomed to the symphony of destruction that followed her father everywhere he went. You're telling me that after 20 years of building this empire, I'm supposed to hand it over to some trust fund brat? Victor Vasquez's voice boomed through the pristine living room, his weathered hands clenched into fists. The lawyer, a thin man who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, cleared his throat nervously. The Blackwood acquisition comes with certain stipulations. Mr. Vasquez. The merger requires a family connection to maintain controlling interest. Delina watched from the shadows of the hallway, her dark eyes tracking every micro-expression on the lawyer's face. At 28, she had learned to read people the way others read books. It was a survival skill in a world where trust was currency she couldn't afford to spend. What kind of family connection? Victor's voice had dropped to a dangerous whisper. Marriage, sir? Between your daughter and Dante Blackwood? The silence that followed was suffocating. Lena's heart hammered against her ribs, but her face remained impassive. This was the moment she had been dreading since the merger talks began 6 months ago. Her father's shipping empire, built from nothing in the gritty ports of Miami, was hemorrhaging money. The Blackwood conglomerate was there, only lifeline, but she had suspected there would be a price. There was always a price, Alina. Victor's voice cut through the air like a blade. Come here. She stepped into the room, her heels clicking against the marble with military precision. The lawyer's eyes widened slightly as he took her in. Alina knew what he saw: a woman who looked like she could slice through steel with her stare, dressed in a black suit that cost more than most people's monthly salary. She had cultivated this image carefully. In her father's world, weakness was death. Did you know about this? Victor's eyes searched her face. I suspected. Her voice was steady, emotionless. The truth was more complicated. She had known the moment she saw Dante Blackwood's file cross her desk. The man was a predator, and predators always hunted for something specific. The lawyer shuffled his papers. Mr. Blackwood has agreed to meet with Miss Vasquez tomorrow evening. Blackwood Tower, 42nd floor. Victor's laugh was bitter, generous of him to make time in his busy schedule of destroying lives. Elena's jaw tightened. She knew about Dante Blackwood's reputation. The tech mogul who had built his empire on the ashes of smaller companies, the man who collected businesses like other people collected art, cold, calculating, and utterly ruthless. At 32, he was already being called the most dangerous man in corporate America. I'll go, she said quietly. Both men turned to stare at her. The lawyer looked surprised. Her father looked suspicious. Alina, I said, I'll go. She met her father's gaze without flinching. This is about survival, isn't it? That's what you taught me. Victor studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. The meeting is at 8. Don't be late, said the lawyer. Packed up his briefcase and hurried out, Alina remained standing in the center of the room. The Miami skyline glittered beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows, a city of dreams and broken promises. She had grown up in its shadows, watching her father claw his way from the docks to penthouse suites. Now it all hung in the balance. Don't have to do this, Victor said quietly, his voice suddenly sounding older than his 55 years. Alina turned to face him. For just a moment, she saw past the empire builder to the man who used to read her bedtime stories, who had held her when her mother died of cancer 10 years ago. But that man was a luxury they couldn't afford right now. Yes, I do. She walked to the window, pressing her palm against the cool glass. Because if I don't, we lose everything. I won't let that happen. The next evening, Alina stood before the gleaming towers of downtown Manhattan. Her reflection multiplied in the glass and steel surfaces that reached toward the storm clouds gathering overhead. The Blackwood Tower pierced the sky like a blade, its modern architecture a stark contrast to the older buildings surrounding it. Everything about it screamed power and intimidation. She had flown in that morning, using the time on the private jet to research everything she could about Dante Blackwood. The man was an enigma, wrapped in expensive suits and hostile takeovers. No scandals, no weaknesses, no apparent humanity. The perfect corporate machine. The elevator to the 42nd floor felt like a rocket ship, shooting her toward an uncertain fate. Her reflection stared back from the polished walls, black hair pulled back in a severe chignon, red lips that hadn't smiled in years, dark eyes that revealed nothing. She looked like a woman who could handle anything, if only that were true. The elevator doors opened to reveal an office that looked more like a modern art museum than a workplace. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking view of the city, while abstract sculptures and paintings dotted the space. Everything was black, white, and steel. Cold, controlled, perfect. Miss Vasquez. She turned toward the voice and felt her carefully constructed composure crack just slightly. Dante Blackwood stood behind a massive desk, tall and lean with dark hair and eyes the color of winter storms. He wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than her car, but it was his presence that made the air feel thinner. Power radiated from him like heat from a fire. Mr. Blackwood. She stepped forward, extending her hand. His fingers closed around hers, warm and firm, and something electric shot up her arm. She pulled her hand back perhaps too quickly and caught the slight curve of his lips. "Please sit." He gestured to the chair across from his desk. "I trust your flight was comfortable." It was fine. She settled into the chair, crossing her legs and folding her hands in her lap. Every movement was calculated, controlled. "Let's dispense with the pleasantries. You want to marry me? Want to know why?" Something flickered in his eye, surprise, perhaps, or admiration. Direct. "I like that. I'm not here to be liked." "No," he said slowly, studying her with an intensity that made her skin burn. "I don't imagine you are." He moved around the desk to lean against it, close enough that she could smell his cologne, something dark and expensive that made her think of midnight and secrets. "The merger requires a family connection," he continued. "Marriage is the most efficient solution." Efficient. The word tasted bitter in her mouth. How romantic. "Romance has nothing to do with this." His voice was matter-of-fact, businesslike. "This would be a contract arrangement.
1 year.
After that, you're free to go with a substantial settlement. And if I refuse," his smile was sharp as a knife, "then your father's company goes under, and you lose everything your family has built over 2 decades. Elena's blood turned to ice, but she kept her expression neutral. "You've done your homework, I always do." He pushed off from the desk and walked to the window, hands clasped behind his back. "Your father overextended himself trying to compete with the Asian shipping conglomerates. The debt is crushing him. Without this merger, Vasquez International will be bankrupt within 6 months." The words hit her like physical blows, but she didn't react, couldn't react. "And what do you get out of this arrangement, Mr. Blackwood?" He turned to face her, and for a moment she thought she saw something human flicker behind those cold eyes. But it was gone so quickly she might have imagined it. "Access to your family's South American shipping routes. And a wife who won't expect. Things I can't give, such as love, affection, a real marriage. I'm not capable of those things, Miss Vasquez, but I am capable of keeping a bargain." Lena stood slowly, smoothing down her skirt. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to find another way, to refuse this cold-blooded arrangement. But beneath the instincts was the iron will her father had forged in her from childhood. Survival at any cost. "I need time to think. You have until tomorrow morning." His voice followed her as she moved toward the elevator. 9 a.m. After that, the offer expires. She paused with her hand on the elevator button and turned back to look at him. He stood silhouetted against the window, the storm clouds behind him making him look like some dark angel fallen to earth. "Why me?" she asked quietly. "You could have anyone." For a moment, something unguarded crossed his features, something that looked almost like loneliness. But then the mask slipped back into place, because you understand that some cages are made of gold, Miss Vasquez. And sometimes the only choice is which one you're willing to live in.
Ow.
The elevator doors closed between them, but his words followed her down 42 floors and out into the storm that was just beginning to break. Over Manhattan, Elena didn't sleep that night. No. She stood on the balcony of her hotel suite, watching the city breathe beneath a blanket of rain and neon. Her silk robe whipping around her legs in the wind. Manhattan at 3 a.m. was a different creature than the polished beast that showed itself during business hours. It was raw, honest, dangerous, like the choice she was about to make. Her phone buzzed against the glass table. A text from her father. The doctors want to run more tests. Don't worry about me. Focus on tomorrow. Elena's grip tightened on the phone. Her father had been hiding his symptoms for months, but she wasn't blind. The weight loss, the fatigue, the way he sometimes pressed his hand to his chest when he thought no one was looking. The company wasn't the only thing dying. At exactly 9 a.m., she stood in Dante Blackwood's office again. This time, he wasn't alone. A woman with silver hair and predatory eyes sat in one of the leather chairs, reviewing documents with surgical precision. Miss Vasquez, this is Margaret Stone, my attorney. Dante's voice was crisp, professional. No trace of the almost human moment they had shared the night before. Margaret looked up with the expression of someone examining an interesting specimen. I've prepared the contract based on Mr. Blackwood's specifications. Shall we review the terms? Elena sat down, spine straight, hands folded. I'm listening. 1-year marriage contract, Margaret began, her voice as cold as winter steel. You will maintain the appearance of a devoted wife at all public functions. You will live in Mr. Blackwood's penthouse. No romantic entanglements with other parties during the contract period. And Mr. Blackwood's romantic entanglements? Elena's eyes found Dante's across the desk. I don't have romantic entanglements, he said flatly. Margaret continued, without missing a beat. Upon completion of the contract, you will receive a settlement of $50 million plus a guaranteed position on the board of the merged company. $50 million, enough to save her father's company twice over, enough to buy him the best medical care in the world, enough to secure their future permanently. And if I breach the contract, you forfeit everything. The settlement, the board, position, and the merger proceeds immediately to dissolution. Margaret's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. Elena studied the contract, reading every clause twice. It was ironclad, brutal in its precision. A golden cage, just as Dante had said. But golden cages had their advantages. I want additions, she said finally. Dante raised an eyebrow. You're in no position to negotiate. Aren't I? She leaned back in her chair, meeting his gaze with steady confidence. You need this marriage as much as I do, Mr. Blackwood. Otherwise, you would have found a more compliant candidate. Something shifted in his expression. Interest, perhaps. Respect. What are your terms? First, my father's medical expenses are covered completely, no questions asked, for the duration of the contract and beyond. Margaret started to object, but Dante held up a hand. Agreed? And the second? Lena's heart pounded, but her voice remained steady. If either of us falls in love with someone else during this year, the contract can be terminated without penalty. The silence that followed was deafening. Margaret looked scandalized. Dante looked amused. You think one of us might fall in love? His voice carried a hint of mockery. I think a year is a long time, Elena replied. And people change. I don't. Everyone changes, Mr. Blackwood. The question is whether they choose to or have it forced upon them. He studied her for a long moment, those storm-gray eyes searching her face as if looking for something. Finally, he nodded. Agreed. Margaret sputtered. Dante, this is highly irregular. Drop the addendum, he commanded without taking his eyes off Elena. We have a wedding to plan. 3 weeks later, Elena stood in the bridal suite of the St. Regis Hotel, staring at her reflection in a mirror that cost more than most people's cars. The wedding dress was a masterpiece of French couture ivory silk that flowed like water with a neckline that suggested rather than revealed. She looked like a princess from a fairy tale. If princesses sold their souls for $50 million, you look beautiful, Mia. Her father's voice was rough with emotion as he entered the suite. The past weeks had aged him, but his eyes still held the fierce pride she remembered from childhood. Papa, she turned to face him, and for a moment they were just father and daughter again, not business moguls or corporate players. Just two people who loved each other in a world that didn't have much room for love. You don't have to do this, he said quietly, echoing his words from weeks before. We've already had this conversation. It's not as your business partner, as your father. He crossed the room and took her hands in his calloused ones. I failed you, Alina. I let pride and ambition put you in this position. You built an empire from nothing, she said fiercely. You gave me everything. It's everything except the right to choose your own life. Alina squeezed his hands. I am choosing. This is my choice. Before he could respond, there was a soft knock at the door. Margaret Stone entered, immaculate, as always, in navy blue. It's time, she announced. The car is waiting. The wedding was to be a small affair, just family and essential business associates. No media, no spectacle. Just two people entering into the most expensive business arrangement of their lives. The ride to the private chapel felt surreal. Alina sat in the back of the Bentley, watching Manhattan blur past the tinted windows. In 30 minutes, she would be Mrs. Dante Blackwood. In 30 minutes, her old life would be officially over. The chapel was beautiful in its simplicity, white marble. Stained glass windows and enough flowers to stock a botanical garden. About 50 people filled the pews, their faces a mixture of curiosity and calculation. This wasn't a wedding, it was a merger with vows. And then she saw him. Dante stood at the altar in a black tuxedo that made him look like sin personified. His dark hair was perfectly styled, his expression unreadable. But when their eyes met across the length of the chapel, something electric passed between them. The same spark she had felt when they first shook hands. The music began. Alina took her father's arm and began the long walk down the aisle. Each step felt like a choice, each breath like a commitment. The guests watched her with predatory interest, but she kept her eyes on Dante, on the man who was about to become her husband in every way except the one that mattered. When they reached the altar, her father kissed her cheek and placed her hand in Dante's. His fingers were warm, steady, and for a moment she felt an absurd sense of safety. You look beautiful, he murmured, his voice too low for anyone else to hear. You look like you'd rather be anywhere else, she whispered back. Wouldn't you? Before she could answer, the officiant began to speak. The ceremony was traditional, formal, nothing like the intimate affair she had dreamed of as a little girl. When it came time for the vows, they each recited the standard promises with perfect precision: to love, to honor, to cherish. Words that meant nothing and everything. Do you, Alina Vasquez, take Dante Blackwood to be your lawfully wedded husband? She looked into his storm-gray eyes and saw something she hadn't expected. Not love, she wasn't naive enough to hope for that, but recognition, understanding. There were two people who had chosen survival over sentiment, and there was a strange intimacy in that shared sacrifice. Do you, Dante Blackwood, take Alina Vasquez to be your lawfully wedded wife? His voice was steady. Sure I do. You may kiss the bride. Dante's hands framed her face gently, his thumbs brushing against her cheekbones. For a moment they stood frozen, staring at each other as if seeing something unexpected. Then his lips touched hers. The kiss was supposed to be for show, a performance for their audience. But the moment their mouths met, something shifted. Heat flared between them, electric and undeniable. Elena's hands fisted in the lapels of his jacket as he deepened the kiss, his tongue sliding against hers with devastating skill. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. The guests applauded, but Elena barely heard them.
All she
could focus on was the way Dante was looking at her like he had just discovered something that changed everything. Mrs. Blackwood, he said quietly, testing out the name. Mr. Blackwood, she replied. Surprised by how much she liked the sound of it, they signed the papers, smiled for photographs, and accepted congratulations from people who couldn't care less about their happiness. But beneath the polite facade, Alina could feel something building between them. Something dangerous, something that hadn't been part of the contract. The reception was held at Dante's penthouse, 30 floors above the city. Alina moved through the crowd like an actress playing a role, the devoted new wife, the grateful merger partner, the woman who had landed one of the world's most eligible bachelors. But her awareness never left Dante. She tracked his movements. Across the room, noticed how he commanded attention without effort. Saw the way other women looked at him with barely concealed hunger. Quite a performance, a voice said behind her. Alina turned to find Marcus Caldwell, Dante's business rival, approaching with a glass of champagne and a predatory smile. She had researched him thoroughly, a corporate shark who'd been circling Dante's empire for years. I'm sorry, the wedding, the loving couple act. Very convincing. His eyes glittered with malicious amusement. Though I suppose when $50 million is on the line, anyone can be a good actress. Elena's blood turned to ice, but her expression never changed. I'm afraid I don't know what you mean. Of course you don't. Marcus moved closer, lowering his voice. But I know all about your little contract, sweetheart. I know exactly how much Dante is paying for this charade. It's impossible, is it? His smile widened. I have friends in many places, Elena. May I call you Elena? After all, we're going to be seeing a lot of each other. Before she could respond, a warm hand settled on her lower back. Dante appeared beside her, his expression pleasant but his eyes deadly cold. Marcus, he said with false warmth, I didn't realize you were still here. Just congratulating your beautiful bride, Marcus replied smoothly. We were having a fascinating conversation about contracts. The temperature in the immediate vicinity seemed to drop 10 degrees. Dante's hand tightened possessively on Elena's back. How interesting. Elena and I don't discuss business at social functions. Do we, darling? She looked up at him, seeing the warning in his eyes. Never. It's so terribly boring. Marcus chuckled. Well, I should let you get back to your guests. Congratulations again. I'm sure this will be a marriage to remember. As he walked away, Elena felt Dante's entire body tense beside her. What did he say to you? His voice was barely above a whisper.
Nothing important.
But even as she said it, she knew it was a lie. Marcus Caldwell knew about their arrangement, which meant their perfect contract was already compromised. And if their secret was out, everything they had planned was about to fall apart. The penthouse was silent, except for the whisper of expensive fabric, eating marble as Elena's wedding dress pulled around her feet. She stood in the master bedroom wearing only her silk slip, her reflection multiplied in the floor-to-ceiling. Windows that offered a breathtaking view of Manhattan's glittering skyline. The guest room is across the hall. Dante's voice came from behind her. Carefully controlled, she turned to find him in the doorway, his bow tie undone and hanging loose. Around his neck, the first few buttons of his shirt open to reveal a triangle of bronze skin. He had shed his jacket somewhere, and the sight of him looking almost human made something twist low in her stomach. Of course, she said quietly. Separate bedrooms. Very civilized. It's what we agreed on. Yes, it is. They stared at each other. Across the room, the air thick with unspoken tension. The kiss at the altar seemed to hang between them like a challenge neither was willing to acknowledge. About Marcus Caldwell, Dante began. Tomorrow, Elena interrupted. Whatever game he's playing, we'll deal with it tomorrow. Tonight she paused, suddenly exhausted by the weight of pretense. Tonight I just want to forget that any of this is real. Something flickered in his eyes. Understanding, perhaps. Or recognition of a fellow survivor. Good night, Mrs. Blackwood. Good night, Mr. Blackwood. But as she lay in the guest rooms, silk sheets an hour later, staring at the ceiling and listening to the city breathe beyond the windows, Elena knew that forgetting was the last thing she would be able to do. The next morning brought a brutal wake-up call. Elena found Dante in his study at 6 a.m., surrounded by newspapers and laptop screens, his face dark with fury. Well, he said without looking up from his computer, we're famous. She moved around his desk to see what had captured his attention, and her blood turned to ice. There on the screen was a tabloid headline that made her stomach drop. Billionaires. Bride or business deal? The article was accompanied by a photo of her and Dante at the altar. But the expression on their faces during the kiss looked anything but contractual. How did they get this? She whispered. One at the wedding had a very expensive conversation with a reporter. His voice was deadly calm. The article speculates about the true nature of our marriage, mentions the merger, even hints at financial arrangements. Elena sank into the chair across from his desk. Marcus. Almost certainly. Dante finally looked at her, and she was surprised by the fury burning in his storm-gray eyes. The question is, How much does he actually know? Before she could answer, Dante's phone rang. He glanced at the caller ID, and his expression darkened further. "Margaret," he answered. "I assume you've seen the news?" Alina could hear the lawyer's voice through the phone, high-pitched with panic. Dante listened for a moment, then hung up without a word. "The board is calling an emergency meeting," he said. "They want to discuss whether the marriage is legitimate enough to satisfy the merger requirements. And if they decide it isn't, then we're both fucked." The profanity was so unexpected, so human, that Alina almost smiled. "Almost, what do we do?" Dante stood and moved to the window, his hands clasped behind his back. The morning light, he looked like a general preparing for battle. "We convince them it's real," he said finally. "We become the perfect couple. It's devoted, inseparable, madly in love." "That sounds complicated." "It's acting, Alina. You managed it yesterday at the reception." She joined him at the window, close enough to smell his cologne and feel the heat radiating from his body. "What if we're not good enough actors?" He turned to look at her, his gaze intense. "Then we lose everything." The next few days passed in a blur of performance art. They attended charity galas where Dante's hand never left her back, had intimate dinners at exclusive restaurants where they gazed into each other's eyes like lovesick teenagers, and gave carefully scripted interviews about their whirlwind. Romance? Alina threw herself into the role with the same determination that had gotten her through law school and built her reputation as one of Miami's most ruthless corporate lawyers. She learned to read Dante's moods, to anticipate his movements, to make their public displays of affection look effortless and genuine. The problem was, they were starting to feel genuine. It began with small things. The way he remembered she took her coffee black, but liked sugar in her tea. How he would rest his hand on the small of her back to guide her through crowds. A gesture that began as performance but lingered even when no cameras were watching. The conversations that stretched late into the night as they planned their next public appearance, but somehow evolved into discussions about books, art, the way the city looked different at 3 a.m. "You're good at this," she said one evening, as they returned from a gallery opening where they had played the devoted couple to perfection. "So are you." He loosened his tie as the elevator carried them up to the penthouse. "Almost too good." There. Eyes met in the polished steel reflection, and Alina felt her pulse quicken. The air between them crackled with the same electricity she had felt at the altar. Dante. His name came out softer than she intended. The elevator doors opened, breaking the spell. They stepped into the penthouse in silence, but the tension followed them like a living thing. "I should go to bed," Alina said, but she didn't move toward the guest room. "Yes," he agreed, but he didn't move either. They stood in the living room. Manhattan spread out beyond the windows like a carpet of stars, and Alina realized they had crossed some invisible line. The contract marriage was supposed to be simple, clean, emotionless. But the man standing across from her was anything but simple. He was complex and damaged and brilliant and beautiful, and she was in serious danger of forgetting that this was all pretend. "This is a mistake," she whispered. Today on the show, we're diving into the world of economic indicators. These are the numbers that tell us how the economy is doing, things like GDP, unemployment rates, and consumer confidence. But what do these indicators really mean? How are they calculated? And how should we interpret them? We'll break it all down for you with the help of some experts to make sense of the numbers that shape our world. "Yes," he said again, but he moved closer. "The contract specifically states, fuck the contract." His mouth crashed against hers with desperate hunger, and Alina melted into him like she had been waiting her whole life for this moment. His hands tangled in her hair, destroying the elegant chignon she had worn to the gallery. Her fingers worked frantically at the buttons of his shirt, desperate to feel skin against skin. He lifted her onto the kitchen counter, his lips trailing fire down her throat as she wrapped her legs around his waist. Everything was heat and need and the kind of chemistry that burned down empires, Alina. Her name was a prayer on his lips, a confession and a question all at once. "I know," she gasped. "I know this changes everything. We can't go back. I don't want to go back." Just as his hands reached for the zipper of her dress, his phone rang. The sound cut through their passion like a blade, and they froze, breathing. Hard and staring at each other, the phone continued to ring. "Answer it," Alina whispered. Dante's jaw clenched, but he reached for the phone. "This better be important," he said without checking the caller ID. Alina watched his face transform as he listened to whoever was on the other end. The heat in his eyes was replaced by something that looked like panic. When he asked sharply, "How bad is it?" she slid off the counter, straightening her dress and trying to read his expression. "I'll be right there," he said, and hung up. "What's wrong?" He ran a hand through his hair, and she could see him rebuilding his walls in real time. "Your father. He collapsed at his office an hour ago. He's been taken to Mount Sinai." The words hit her like a physical blow. Lena's knees went weak, and she gripped the edge of the counter to keep from falling. "Is he?" She couldn't finish the question. "He's alive," Dante said quickly. "But Alina, it's serious." The drive to the hospital passed in a blur of neon lights and sirens. Dante held her hand in the back of the town car, his thumb tracing circles on her palm, but Alina barely registered his touch. All she could think about was her father's face that morning at breakfast. How tired he had looked, how he had insisted he was fine when she asked if he was feeling well. They found him in the cardiac intensive care unit, looking smaller and more fragile than she had ever seen him. Tubes and wires connected him to machines that beeped with mechanical precision, monitoring every heartbeat, every breath. "Papa," she whispered, taking his hand in hers. His eyes fluttered open, focusing on her with effort. "Mia," he said, his voice barely audible. "You came." "Of course I came. Don't talk. Just rest." "No." He struggled to sit up slightly. "Listen to me. There are things I should have told you." "Papa, please the company," he gasped. "Alina, there are problems beyond what we discussed. It's things I've hidden from you." Lena's heart clenched. "What kind of problems? Your husband?" Victor's eyes found Dante, who was standing in the doorway, giving them privacy. "He's not what you think he is. What do you mean?" But before Victor could answer, the machines around his bed began to alarm. Nurses rushed in, pushing Alina aside as they worked to stabilize him. "We need you to wait outside," one of them said firmly. Alina found herself in the hallway, shaking with fear and confusion. Dante was beside her immediately, his arms coming around her in a gesture that felt automatic, necessary. "He's going to be okay," he said against her hair. "You heard what he said?" she whispered. "About you not being what I think you are?" What did he mean? Dante went very still. When she pulled back to look at his face, she saw something that made her blood run cold. Guilt. "Dante," she said slowly.
Ow. What did he mean?
He opened his mouth to answer, but before he could speak, Marcus Caldwell appeared at the end of the hallway, flanked by two men in expensive suits who looked like they ate smaller companies for breakfast. "Well, well," Marcus said with false sympathy. "I heard about Victor's heart attack. Such a shame. Get out of here, Marcus." Dante's voice was deadly quiet. "Oh, I don't think so." Marcus smiled like a shark scenting blood. "You see, I have some very interesting information about how Victor's company ended up in such dire financial straits. Information that might surprise his devoted daughter." Elena's world tilted on its axis. "What is he talking about?" "Tell her, Dante," Marcus said, pleasantly. "Tell her how you've been systematically destroying her father's business for the past 2 years. Tell her how every coincidence that led to Vasquez International's downfall was carefully orchestrated by you." "That's not," Dante began.
Tell
"Her how you bought out their creditors, manipulated their shipping contracts, even arranged for that convenient labor strike that cost them millions." Marcus was enjoying this, savoring every word like fine wine. "Tell her how you created the very crisis that forced her to marry you." Alina felt the floor drop out from under her. She turned to stare at Dante, searching his face for denial, for explanation, for anything that would make this not true, but all she saw was guilt. "Alina," he said quietly, "let me explain. It's true." The words came out as barely a whisper. "It's not what you think. It's true." Louder this time, her voice. Breaking on the words, Marcus clapped his hands together once, the sound echoing off the hospital walls. And now, thanks to that lovely contract you two signed, I have documentation of fraud, conspiracy, and about 6 other felonies that will put Blackwood Industries in my hands by the end of the week. Alina couldn't breathe. The man she had been, falling in love with realization, hit her like a physical blow, had orchestrated her father's destruction, had manipulated her into a marriage that was built on lies within lies. "You bastard," she whispered, her voice shaking with rage and heartbreak. Dante reached for her, but she jerked away from his touch like it burned. "Alina, please, let me explain." "Why? Why?" Her laugh was bitter, broken. "You want to explain why you destroyed my father's life? Why you manipulated me into marrying you? Why everything between us has been a lie?" "Everything," he said desperately. "What happened between us tonight was part of your plan too, wasn't it?" The words tasted like poison in her mouth. "Get me to fall for you, make it more believable, easier to control." "No, Alina, no, that's not Mr. and Mrs. Blackwood." A doctor appeared in the doorway behind them, his expression grave. "I need to speak with you about Mr. Vasquez's condition." Alina looked between the doctor, Dante, and Marcus, her world spinning out of control. Her father was dying. Our marriage was a sham built on betrayal. And the man she had started to love was the architect of her destruction. "I want him out of here," she said, pointing at Marcus. "And I want you," she turned to Dante, "to stay away from me. Stay away from my father. This marriage is over." She turned and followed the doctor back into her father's room, leaving Dante standing in the hallway with the ruins of everything they had built together. But as the door closed behind her, she heard Marcus's voice, soft and venomous. "Game set. And match, old friend. Thanks for doing all the hard work for me." Alina spent the next 72 hours in a hospital chair that smelled of disinfectant and broken dreams. Watching her father fight for every breath while machines kept him tethered to life, she hadn't slept, had barely eaten, and existed in a haze of grief and rage that felt like drowning in slow motion. The doctor said he was stable, but critical. The massive heart attack had damaged his heart muscle, and his recovery would be long and uncertain. If he recovered at all, she held his hand and whispered apologies for things that weren't her fault. Promises she wasn't sure she could keep, and love that felt too big for words. But underneath it all was the constant burn of betrayal, the knowledge that Dante Blackwood had orchestrated all of this suffering. "Miss Vasquez." Alina looked up to find a young woman in a crisp business suit standing in the doorway. She looked nervous, like someone about to deliver bad news to a person who had already had too much of it. "Mrs. Blackwood," Alina corrected, automatically, then wanted to take it back. She wasn't sure if she had the right to that name anymore. "I'm Sarah Chen from Blackwood Industries Legal Department. Mr. Blackwood asked me to bring you these documents." Alina stared at the manila. "A folder like it might contain a bomb?" "I don't want anything from him." "Ma'am, I think you should look at these. They're important." With shaking hands, Alina opened the folder. Inside were financial documents, legal papers, and what looked like a confession written in Dante's precise handwriting. "Alina," the letter began, "I know you have no reason to believe anything I say, but I need you to understand the truth. Not the version Marcus wants you to believe, but what actually happened." Her eyes skimmed the pages, taking in details that made her head spin. Yes, Dante had been involved in her father's business troubles, but not the way Marcus had portrayed it. According to the documents, Dante had discovered that Marcus Caldwell had been systematically targeting Vasquez International, using a network of shell companies and corrupt officials to destroy the business from within. Victor was meant to be collateral damage and Marcus's real target, Dante himself. "Your father came to me 6 months ago," the letter continued. "He had figured out what Marcus was doing and wanted my help to stop it, but we were too late. The damage was already done. The marriage contract wasn't my idea, Alina. It was your father's. He thought if we could unite our companies legitimately, could save both your family's legacy and protect you from Marcus's retaliation." Elena's hands were shaking as she turned to the next page. I agreed because I thought it would be simple. A business arrangement, nothing more. I never expected to care about you the way I do. I never expected to fall in love with you. The words blurred as tears she had been holding back for 3 days finally spilled over. I know I've lost your trust, and I know I probably don't deserve to get it back. But I need you to know that what happened between us was real. It's the only real thing in my life for as long as I can remember. The final page was a legal document transferring full control of Blackwood Industries to Alina, along with enough liquid assets to pay off every debt Vasquez International had ever incurred. Take it all, the letter concluded. Save your father's company. Save your family's legacy. And when Marcus tries to destroy you next, you'll have the resources to fight back. This is my sacrifice to you, Alina. The only way I know how to show you that my love for you was never a lie. I'm sorry for everything. I'm sorry I wasn't strong enough to find another way. Dante Alina stared at the documents, her mind racing. If this was true, if Dante had been trying to protect them all along, she looked up at Sarah Chen, who was still hovering nervously in the doorway. Where is he, Mr. Blackwood? I don't know, ma'am. He hasn't been to the office in 2 days. His assistant says he's not answering his phone. Before Alina could respond, her father's hand tightened around hers. She turned to see his eyes open, more alert than they had been since the heart attack. Papa, how are you feeling? Like I've been hit by a truck, he said weakly, but his voice was stronger. Alina, we need to talk. You should rest. No. He struggled to sit up slightly. I heard what that bastard Caldwell said in the hallway. Is it true? Does Dante have the papers? Alina hesitated, then nodded. Victor's face crumpled with relief. Thank God. Alina, you have to understand. Dante isn't the villain here. He saved us. Papa, what are you talking about? 6 months ago, I found out that someone was destroying our company from the inside. Bribing officials, manipulating contracts, cutting off our credit lines. At first, I thought it was Dante. He was our biggest competitor, after all. Victor coughed, and Alina helped him sip some water before he continued. When I confronted him, he showed me proof that it was Marcus Caldwell. Marcus has been trying to destroy the Blackwood Empire for years, and we were just caught in the crossfire. Elena's heart was pounding. Our resources and fight back. Dante could have just bought our debt and dissolved the company. Instead, he offered to marry you and merge our businesses as equals. Victor's eyes were earnest, pleading. Lena, he didn't have to do that. Could have let us fall and picked up the pieces for pennies on the dollar. But why didn't you tell me? Because I knew you. If you thought you were being manipulated, you never would have agreed. And because Victor's voice grew quiet, ashamed. Because I was proud. I couldn't admit that I had failed to protect my own company. My own daughter. Alina closed her eyes, feeling the weight of misunderstanding crash over her. She had been so ready to believe the worst about Dante, so quick to assume he was like every other powerful man who had tried to use her. Papa, I think I made a terrible mistake. Then fix it, he said simply. If you love Hyman, I think you do, then fix it. But first, Alina had a more pressing problem to solve. She turned to Sarah Chin, who had been pretending not to eavesdrop on their conversation. I need you to call an emergency board meeting tonight, and I need you to make sure Marcus Caldwell is there. Ma'am, I'm not sure I have the authority. Alina stood up, and for the first time in days, felt like herself again. The woman who had built a reputation as one of Miami's most ruthless lawyers. The woman who didn't back down from a fight. You do now, she said, holding up the papers Dante had given her. As of today, I own controlling interest in Blackwood Industries. I have a hostile takeover to stop. The Blackwood Industries boardroom had never seen a night like this one. Lena arrived at 9 p.m. sharp, wearing a black power suit that looked like armor and carrying a briefcase full of ammunition. The board members were already seated, looking confused and nervous about the emergency meeting. Marcus Caldwell sat at the far end of the table, radiating confidence and predatory satisfaction. Gentlemen, Alina said, as she took her place at the head of the table, and ladies, thank you for coming on such short notice. It's Mrs. Blackwood. Marcus's voice was smooth as silk and twice as dangerous. How nice to see you again. Surprised you're here. I would have thought you'd be filing for divorce about now. Oh, I'm full of surprises, Alina replied pleasantly. In fact, I have several for you tonight. She opened her briefcase and began distributing copies of documents. To each board member, financial records, wire transfers, communications between shell companies, and a very detailed dossier on Marcus Caldwell's business practices over the past 5 years. What you're looking at, Alina said, as confused murmurs filled the room, is evidence of a systematic campaign by Mr. Caldwell to destroy both Vasquez International and Blackwood Industries through fraud, bribery, and market manipulation. Marcus laughed, but there was a note of nervousness in it now. That's quite an accusation, sweetheart. Do you have any proof? Lena smiled, and it was sharp enough to cut glass. It's funny you should ask. The boardroom doors opened. An FBI agent. Jennifer Morrison walked in, flanked by 2 other agents. Alina had worked with Morrison on several corporate fraud cases during her law career, and the woman owed her more than a few favors. Marcus Caldwell, Agent Morrison announced, you're under arrest for securities fraud, conspiracy, and racketeering. The room erupted in chaos. Marcus shot to his feet, his face twisted with rage. This is bullshit. You can't prove anything. Actually, we can. Agent Morrison said calmly as she cuffed him. Your former partner in the Cayman Islands decided to cooperate with our investigation. Amazing how quickly people talk when they're facing 25 to life. As Marcus was led away, still protesting his innocence, Alina turned to face the stunned board members. Now then, she said sweetly, let's discuss the future of this company. It was nearly midnight when Alina finally left Blackwood Industries. She had spent 3 hours convincing the board to accept new leadership, restructuring the company to prevent future hostile takeovers, and setting up a foundation to help other businesses targeted by predatory practices. But through it all, one thought kept echoing in her mind. She needed to find Dante. She tried his penthouse first, but the doorman said Mr. Blackwood hadn't been home in days. His office was empty. His assistant had no idea where he was. It was like he had simply disappeared. Finally, on a desperate hunch, Alina asked his driver to take her to the Blackwood family estate in the Hamptons. It was a place Dante had mentioned. Only once, in passing, during one of their late-night conversations, the house where he had grown up, where his parents had died in a car accident when he was 16, leaving him to build an empire from grief and determination. The estate was dark when she arrived, but there was a single light burning in what looked like a study on the 2nd floor. Elena's heart hammered as she approached the front door, not sure what she would say, not sure if he would even want to see her. She found him in his father's old office, surrounded by photo albums and empty whiskey bottles. He looked like hell stubble, covering his jaw, his hair disheveled, his shirt wrinkled and stained. When he looked up at her standing in the doorway, his storm-gray eyes were empty of everything except pain. Alina, her name was barely a whisper. What are you doing here? She stepped into the room, her heart breaking at the sight of him. This was what her rejection had done to him. This was the cost of her mistrust. I came to apologize, she said quietly. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. You came to apologize? Lena, I destroyed your father's life. I manipulated you into marrying me. You have nothing to apologize for. Yes, I do. She moved closer, careful not to spook him. I should have trusted you. I should have known you weren't capable of the cruelty Marcus accused you of. You had every reason not to trust me, Dante said bitterly. I've never given anyone a reason to trust me. Gave me dozens of reasons, Alina said fiercely. The way you remembered how I liked my coffee. The way you made sure my father got the best medical care without being asked. The way you looked at me like I was something precious instead of something to be used. Dante closed his eyes. Lena, don't what? Don't tell you I love you. Because I do, Dante. I love you, and I'm sorry it took me so long to realize it. The words hung in the air between them like a bridge. Neither was sure they could cross. You can't love me, he said finally. I'm the reason your father almost died. I'm the reason you've suffered, Marcus Caldwell, is the reason I suffered, Elena interrupted. You're the reason I survived it. She knelt beside his chair, taking his face in her hands and forcing him to look at her. Dante, listen to me. I know. The truth now. It's about Marcus, about the company, about why you really married me. My father told me everything. Something flickered in his eyes. Hope maybe, or fear. I also know what you gave up for me, she continued. You signed over your entire empire to save my family. That's not the action of a manipulative bastard. That's the action of a man who loves someone more than his own life. Alina. Her name broke on his lips like a prayer. I want to try again, she said. It's not as part of a contract or a business arrangement. I want to try being married for real. If you'll have me? For a moment, they stared at each other in the lamplight of his father's study. Two damaged people who had found something real in the middle of lies and betrayal. Then, Dante pulled her into his arms and kissed her, like she was air and he had been drowning without her. 3 months later, Alina stood in her father's hospital room, watching him pack his few belongings into a small suitcase. The cardiac rehabilitation had been brutal, but Victor Vasquez was nothing if not resilient. Today, finally, he was going home. You don't have to hover, Mia, he said with amusement. Folding his pajamas with the same precision he had once used to negotiate shipping contracts. I'm not going to collapse the moment you turn your back. I know, Alina lied, adjusting his pillows for the 3rd time in 5 minutes. I just want to make sure you have everything. What I have, Victor said, taking her hand in his weathered one, is a daughter who saved the family business, took down one of the most corrupt men in corporate America, and found real love in the process. I'd say that's everything, Alina smiled, but there was still a shadow in her eyes. The past 3 months had been a whirlwind of rebuilding the company, their relationship with Dante, and most importantly, the trust between all of them. But some wounds took time to heal completely. Papa, do you ever regret not telling me the truth from the beginning? Victor considered this carefully. I regret that you suffered because of my pride. But Alina, if I had told you everything, would you have given Dante a real chance? Would you have let yourself fall in love with him? Alina thought about it. The woman she had been 3 months ago, armored in cynicism and self-protection, probably would have kept Dante at arm's length forever. Sometimes the heart needed to be tricked into opening. Maybe not, she admitted. Then perhaps some deceptions serve love better than truth. A soft knock at the door interrupted them. Alina turned to see Dante standing in the doorway, holding a bouquet of white roses and looking uncharacteristically nervous. I hope I'm not interrupting, he said. Never, Alina said, and meant it. The sight of him still made her pulse quicken, still made her feel like the luckiest woman alive. Over the past 3 months, they had been learning each other all over again, this time without contracts or pretense, just 2 people choosing each other every day. It hadn't always been easy. There were nights when old insecurities crept in, when Alina wondered if she was foolish to trust a man who had built an empire. Uncalculated moves. There were days when Dante seemed to expect her to leave, as if waiting for the other shoe to drop, but they worked through it. They talked until 3 a.m. when sleep wouldn't come. They fought and made up and fought again, until they learned how to disagree without destroying each other. They built something real from the ashes of their fake marriage. Ready to go home, Victor? Dante asked, setting the roses on the bedside table. More than ready, Victor replied. Though I'm told I have to put up with a live-in nurse for the first few weeks. Doctor's orders, Alina said firmly. And before you argue, it's already been arranged. I wasn't going to argue, Victor said with mock innocence. Was going to ask if she's pretty, Papa Dante La Fida, sound that had become Elena's favorite music over the past months. The man who had once seemed carved from ice had thawed into someone warm and funny and devastatingly human. The drive back to Miami was peaceful. It's filled with easy conversation and comfortable silences. Alina sat in the back of the town car with her father, watching Dante's hands on the steering wheel. He had insisted on driving himself, claiming he needed the control after months of letting other people handle everything. They were crossing the causeway when Victor spoke again. Dante, there's something I want to discuss with you. Of course, Dante replied, glancing in the rearview mirror. I want to retire. The words hung in the air like a bombshell. Lena stared at her father. In shock, Papa? What are you talking about? I'm 72 years old, Elena. I've had a heart attack. I've spent most of my adult life building something that almost killed me. Victor's voice was gentle, but firm. "It's time to let the next generation take over. The company will be in excellent hands," Victor interrupted. "Between you and Dante, Vasquez Blackwood Industries will thrive for decades to come." Alina felt tears prick her eyes. Her father's company had been his entire identity for as long as she could remember. To give it up, even to her, must feel like surrendering a piece of his soul. "Are you sure?" she asked quietly. "I've never been more sure of anything," Victor replied. "I want to travel. I want to read books that have nothing to do with shipping manifests. I want to spoil my future grandchildren rotten." Alina blushed at the implied question, but Dante's eyes found hers in the mirror, warm with promise. "Besides," Victor continued, with a sly smile, "someone needs to make sure you two don't work yourselves to death the way I did." That evening, Alina found herself back in the penthouse that had become home in ways she never expected. She stood in the kitchen where she and Dante had almost lost themselves to passion months ago. But this time, there were no interruptions, no contracts, no barriers between them. "Penny for your thoughts," Dante said, sliding his arms around her. Waist from behind, Alina leaned back against his chest, marveling at how perfectly she fit against him. Just thinking about how different everything is now. Better different or worse different? Definitely better. She turned in his arms too. "Face him, though I have to admit I miss the penthouse sex sometimes." Dante's eyebrows rose. "What makes you think we can't have penthouse sex now?" "Nothing, I suppose," Alina said with pretend innocence. "Though I should probably mention that I had some additions made to our bedroom while you were in London last week." "What kind of additions?" Instead of answering, Alina took his hand and led him toward the master bedroom. When she opened the door, Dante's intake of breath was audible. The room had been transformed. Soft lighting cast everything in a golden glow. The bed was covered in silk sheets the color of champagne, scattered with white rose petals. Candles flickered on every surface, filling the air with the scent of vanilla and sandalwood. But it was the small velvet box sitting on his pillow that made Dante's heart stop. "Alina," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "What is this?" "Well," she said, suddenly nervous, "technically we're already married, but that was business." This she picked up the velvet box and opened it to reveal a simple platinum band. "This is personal." Inside the box, engraved on the inner band, were words that made Dante's throat close up. "Choose me every day, Alina Vasquez," said, taking the ring from the box with shaking hands. "Will you marry me? For real this time?" "Thought you'd never asked," she whispered. He slipped the ring onto her finger, and it was perfect. Just like everything else about this woman who had walked into his life in a black power suit and turned his world upside down. "I love you," he said against her lips. "Not because of a contract or a merger or any business arrangement. I love you because you make me want to be the man you see when you look at me." "I love you too," Alina replied, "because you saw past my armor to the woman underneath. Because you taught me that sometimes the greatest risk is letting yourself be happy." They made love that night with a tenderness that came from knowing they had all the time in the world. No deadlines, no contracts, no expiration dates. Just two people who had found each other in the middle of a storm and chosen to build something beautiful from the wreckage. Later, as they lay tangled in silk sheets with the city sparkling beyond their windows, Alina traced patterns on Dante's chest with her fingertip. "So what happens now?" she asked. "Now we live," Dante said simply. "We run our companies during the day and come home to each other at night. Fight about who's working too late and make up in creative ways. Hey, we have babies who will be too smart for their own good and spoil them rotten." "Babies, plural?" "At least 3, Dante said seriously. "I was an only child." "It was lonely," Alina laughed, the sound bubbling up from somewhere deep and happy. 3 might be a bit ambitious for our first negotiation. Fine, we'll start with 1 and see how it goes." "Deal," Alina said, sealing it with a kiss. 6 months later, Alina stood in the same chapel where they had first exchanged vows, but this time everything was different. Her father walked her down the aisle, healthy and proud, towards a man who looked at her like she hung the stars in the sky. There were no cameras, no reporters, no business associates calculating the merger potential. Just family and friends, who had come to witness something real when the officiant asked if she took Dante to be her husband. Elena's voice was strong and sure. I do. Every day for the rest of my life. And when Dante promised to love and cherish her, there were tears in his storm-gray eyes that he didn't bother to hide. Their kiss this time wasn't for show or for cameras. It was a promise, a beginning, and a testament to the fact that sometimes the best love stories start with the worst reasons. As they walked back down the aisle, as husband and wife really, truly married, Elena caught sight of a newspaper headline on someone's phone. Blackwood Vasquez empire continues expansion. She smiled and squeezed Dante's hand. Let the world talk about their business empire. She knew the truth. The most important thing they had built together couldn't be measured in stock prices or profit margins. They had built a love story. And that, Elena thought, as her husband spun her around in the sunshine outside the chapel, was the only contract that really mattered. The end.